cafe in the diplomatic district in the Bangladeshi capital, Dhaka. As far as we know, reports are that the attackers are now negotiating with the authorities at the scene. It began just over 3 hours ago at around 9 p.m. local time. Now, it's gone midnight there now in Dhaka, but it seems that negotiations are only just starting to get underway. As for the amount of people who are being held inside, that still remains unknown. But reports say that it could be around 20 people inside that cafe and that many of them are foreigners. A gun battle that began when the gunman went in, that's now reportedly ended, and apparently at least 30 people have been injured. It was earlier said that it was only around 3 people wounded, and 2 of them were believed to be police officers, but it seems that the number of people wounded in the gun attack there has increased. Now, the local media in Dhaka is reporting that several gunmen, we think it could be around 9 or 10 gunmen, entered a cafe and opened fire 9 p.m. local time on Friday evening. Now, although negotiations have opened up, the identity of the attackers or their motive or who they may or may not be affiliated to, that is still unclear. Maybe those details will emerge as those negotiations get underway with hostage situation experts from the police in Dhaka. We may know that in the next few minutes or so, I guess. But the information is believed to be that Islamic militants are behind this attack. We heard from an Air Force, a retired Air Force officer from Pakistan who suggested there could be a number of groups, disgruntled groups in Bangladesh who may be behind this, but the intelligence so far points to it possibly being Islamic militants. That is as yet unconfirmed. Maybe we'll learn more in the coming minutes. The Holy Cafe is targeted, that's been targeted, is popular among expats, diplomats and middle-class families in that area, which has been cordoned off now for the past hour or so at least. The area that we're talking about is called Gulshan, and it's an upmarket neighbourhood in the capital. It's also the main embassy district, and therefore it's got many foreign citizens living there. It's also a large residential area as well, so the usual infrastructure you'd imagine, schools, restaurants and shopping centres. Right, let's get more on this now. We can get reaction from Cynthia McKinney. She's a former US Congresswoman and a member of the Green Party. Cynthia, welcome to RT International. Just to reiterate then, this area targeted in the Bangladesh capital hosts the majority of embassies. Must be one of the most secured sites. As far as you know then, how much on the radar of the US State Department was it to make sure that area was on close watch?
Well, Bangladesh has been the site of several incidents that have captured international attention. And of course, the United States is a part of that attention. We just, as I went to bed, because it's like extremely late here, and as I went to bed, I just learned that a Hindu priest had been attacked and killed, and only to be awakened by my mother, who's calling me from the U.S. to let me know that this was an ongoing situation in Gulshan. Now, Gulshan, as you have correctly pointed out, is the international district in the very large city of Dhaka. And I would also just like to point out that Bangladesh has been the point of attention for a very long time. And I think that part of what's happening here is not just this string of incidents that have taken place that are totally uncharacteristic for the country, but also the fact that Bangladesh sits at the northernmost part of the Bay of Bengal, which enters once one finishes with the Strait of Malacca, which enters into the South China Sea, which of course is receiving a lot of U.S. attention these days.
Yeah, and can I ask, how close are you to where this is taking place, to the Gulshan district?
I am not in the Gulshan district, but I am in Dhaka.
And bearing in mind Bangladesh is one of the world's poorest nations, what's the level of security like there among local police, local security forces?
Well, after the killing of the foreigners, which took place several months ago, the security was ramped up quite a bit. And then, of course, there was an incident that it didn't happen at the after that incident, it didn't happen at the airport, but the airport was targeted by the government and by the international community for enhanced security. And so the government responded appropriately and hired a UK business company to ramp up the security at the airport. So as far as my maneuverings around town are concerned, I have not faced any security issue, and there is definitely a police presence on the streets.
I just want to update our viewers on the Reuters news agency. The Bangladeshi police chief says the authorities plan to start an operation soon to rescue the hostages in that Dhaka restaurant. Quite what that means, I don't know. As we know, negotiations opened about 20 minutes or so ago with the gunmen, around 9 gunmen inside that restaurant who've been holding hostages for around 3 hours now. But an operation soon to rescue the hostages inside is to start soon. When more details on that become available, we will, of course, let people know. You mentioned there, Cynthia, about security, that you sort of feel relatively safe in Dhaka. Given that security, as you said, is intense in that district because of all those embassies there, how do you think gunmen would have managed to get in then? What does that suggest about who they might be?
Well, this, of course, is the $64 million question. Who has been carrying out this string of incidents? It's not just this particular incident. There have been a string of incidents, and I would remind the audience that I've been to Libya, I've been to Syria, so I know what destabilization looks like. I've been to Venezuela, and so I would just like to say that the United States government is very keen on attributing the ongoing situation to ISIS. But the government has maintained steadfastly that this is not an ISIS issue. So the $64 million question would be, well, who is doing this and why is this happening now in Bangladesh? I would also just like to add geostrategically that the Bangladesh government has extremely warm relations with both China and Russia, and they have most recently agreed to provide military weapons to the Bangladeshi government. So this indicates the closeness of the relations between China and Russia, which are two countries at which the United States is at some confrontation at the present time, both with respect to, say, for example, the situation in Ukraine with Russia and the encroachment in the Russian sphere of influence of NATO, to direct patrols that are taking place inside the South China Sea. So the pivot to Asia, one must be always reminded that Russia is an Asian country, and so is China, an Asian country. And so the United States pivot to Asia is going to entail some confrontation, some additional confrontation. Since I am here and I've come to know the Bangladeshi people, the last thing that I want to see is the Iraqization of Bangladesh. But when geostrategic giants confront each other, it's the little people that get crushed. And I'm hoping that Bangladesh is not in that particular situation. I would also like to point out that the United States has long been interested, since the 1980s, in the islands that are under the control of Bangladesh in the Bay of Bengal. The United States wants to establish a military base there, which would be extremely beneficial to the U.S. But the people of Bangladesh have vetoed this every time it has come up. And so the people of Bangladesh do not want to see their country occupied, and they don't want to see their country become a battleground in a geostrategic game.
I wanted to ask you, Cynthia, because it seems then that there's an extremely complex picture emerging here, that if this attack has taken place in the diplomatic district, next to where the foreign embassies are, near to where the US embassy is, and yet when I was going to ask you who's helping Bangladesh, and as you said, it's China and Russia, so it then becomes confusing as to maybe who could be behind this. We still don't know who these gunmen are, whether it's so-called Islamic State and what the target was. Was it Western embassies or nearby the embassies of the people who are helping Bangladesh? It's very complex, isn't it?
It's extremely complex. And so I would say that what we need to do now is not jump to any conclusions, but to allow well, first of all, we've got these hostages that need to be released. We've got a situation that is unfolding that needs to be resolved. After the situation is resolved, then I think it would be appropriate for us to follow the events and understand what the investigation is and how it's coming along as to who's behind this series of events. And like I say, this is a series. This is not just one discrete event. So, for example, we had a situation where not very long ago where the Shia community inside Dhaka was attacked with a firebomb. And when I asked around and said, well, when was the last time something like this happened? They said, not in 4,000 years. Because, of course, you know, the civilization here is that old. And never had anything like that happen before. At least that's what I had been told. And so now we've got the attacks on Hindu priests, the attacks on Buddhist priests, the attacks on foreigners, the attacks on Shia. And so all of this is happening as a string of incidents.
Indeed. Well, I really appreciate your insight from inside Dhaka. And as you said, it's getting late there. It's about midnight, is it, where you are?
Yes.
And I hope that when you wake up that there's been a successful conclusion to this with a minimum number of people hurt. For now, though, Cynthia McKinney, thanks for joining us. While the identities of the attackers remain unknown, reports suggest that they may be Islamic militants, but it's not known whether they be affiliated to any particular group or not. Now, witnesses say that the attackers shouted Allahu Akbar when they entered the cafe just after 9 p.m. local time on Friday. Islamic State, of course, have claimed responsibility for a number of attacks in the country over the past year.